This is part 2 to the Mildred Roxborough interview. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.
Scene 2, take 4, sound roll 2, camera roll 3.
Okay, great. Why don't we talk now about some of the different activities that your father and the people who got involved in the organization, in the branch, were doing.
Well, some of the activities in which the branch became, the Haywood County branch, NAACP, became involved were, one, they were interested in attempting to equalize teachers' pay, at least to improve it, to if not equalize it. So a committee of the branch representatives visited the superintendent of schools to lay this before them, led by my father, and my mother was on the committee. That's one issue. Another problem involved tenant farmers who were being denied credit. The only way tenant farmers could survive during the winter months was to get credit from the local store and then pay up in the when the harvest or in the summertime or whenever. And of course, they were being either denied credit or being charged extortionate rates. And complaints were made to my father about the treatment they were being accorded. There were just a couple of stores to which most of the tenant farmers went. So this again, and they were black, and this again was an issue which my father took up with as the branch, not him alone, but his leadership. He provided the leadership for a committee to visit upon these storekeepers and negotiate with them, and they were very nasty. But he also pointed out to them, and the committee did, that this was important because these farmers provided the produce on which the landowners depended and which would eventually come to their shelves and their markets, and that it was in their best interest to make sure that these tenant farmers, the majority of whom were black, could survive during the winter so that they could harvest the crops. And they made some progress.
Okay, okay, let's start again. Again, this is more detailed, frankly, than I need.
Then you want, okay.
There's another show on tenant farming, and they're going to get into that. So really what I need is almost just a list of the
shopping
list.
Things.
It's almost a shopping list of this is the kinds of things they engaged in. So,
well, the branch actively pursued the matter of equal pay for teachers, treatment of tenant farmers and sharecroppers, also preparing people for a campaign to register for the right to vote. And that required going to talk to people about what was important about voting and that they should be able to write and comprehend certain level of reading material and so forth. That was another very important issue which they addressed. And the matter of the treatment which was accorded blacks who were put in jail for various offenses. That was another important issue, and the fact that they were really put in a holding cell area which was overcrowded, and in other words, the treatment was not good for any human being, and that was an issue. Other issues involved the way blacks were treated by salespeople in the downtown or uptown stores. The fact that they were addressed by their first names, although their money was accepted, they were not treated as the white customers were treated with the same amount of decorum and so forth. Those were the kinds of issues about which they were concerned, as well as the...
And what would they do with those? I mean, what would they do to redress those issues?
Well, there was a committee for everything. It usually was the same committee, but they would visit up on the store owners.
Let me know in the comments, were you now or your parents when you were younger a part of any type of committees? If so, let me know in the comments.
To negotiate. Sometimes they were successful, sometimes they were summarily dismissed, get out of here, but they would go back. Then at times they would demonstrate. It was a small town with a courthouse in the center of town, and everything was around it, just as a wheel with the spokes. They would demonstrate in front of the stores that have signs. They went to the courthouse and stood on the courthouse steps with their signs, depending on which issue it was. And at first, it was they were greeted with amazement and derision. But eventually, people started noticing them. First, the blacks generally would not participate. And the more the people demonstrated, and when I say demonstrated, I don't mean a large demonstration. I mean, if they had a committee of 6 up there, a group of 10, that was a big demonstration. But and on the weekends, everybody came to town in their wagons, or if they had old cars of the 30s, they'd drive in town for the day to shop and greet each other. It was a social day as well as replenishing supplies, so that they would pass through the crowds, the black crowds which gathered in certain areas of town on Saturdays to preach about the NAACP and what they were doing. And have you heard? They went to the courthouse and they demonstrated because Joe Jones was thrown in jail and he was beaten. Brutality was an issue too. These are some of the specific things which were happening.
That's great. That's great. Now, can you tell me then what kinds of danger and resistance, was it dangerous for them? Was there a lot of resistance to what they were doing? And now I think we want to get into the story of the harassment.
Well, at first, the whites in the town thought that the NAACP, as it was beginning to be organized, was a good Christian organization which would do good, just as the BYPU or one of these church clubs or groups which existed would do. Then as the demonstrations began and as they began to speak and become vocal, and blacks who had been quiet in the past were emboldened by the leadership of the NAACP branch, as they heretofore those who had been satisfied and quiet, then they accused the NAACP of becoming a troublemaker, and that my father was the leader of the troublemakers in this town, and that this thing was beginning to get out of hand. So resistance started, and they were less tolerant as a general population. The law enforcement officials had not paid much attention before, but now they started enforcing unknown or little known laws about where you should walk on the sidewalk or how many feet you should be from the courthouse when you were protesting, or the law about not bearing signs which were offensive to others, or all kinds of contrivances.
Tell me some other laws that you think was created to kind of control people. Let me know in the comments.
And it was during this period, one of the most important ways of stopping or reducing this kind of activity would be to attack the source of income or limit the source of income. So early on, there was a move afoot to make sure that they could secure the names of all of the teachers who belonged to the NAACP. And they made it known that they were securing these names one way or the other. They were trying to get members to tell who belonged, and because they couldn't get the membership rolls, which my mother had. And as a result, they would find out maybe 1 or 2 names, and they knew that my mother and father were members. So my mother lost her job. She was fired because of her NAACP activity. And a couple of other teachers were also. And then the others became frightened, of course, and they would not come to the meetings. They would support the activities, but not visibly so. They would contribute. We had the tenant farmers again, who were members, were denied credit. They started systematically determining to the best of their ability, their meaning the whites in the community and the patron fathers of the town, which would involve the city officials. And you see, one thing which is important to remember about this, the blacks had a pipeline into the white community. So in large measure, they could find out what went on at these informal meetings they had to determine how to handle the Negroes before almost the meetings were over. As an example, my father's half-uncle was mayor of the town. So there were ways of getting this kind of information sub rosa. and they could sort of cope, or at least try to prepare themselves for this. And as the controversies heated up, the measures became stiffer. They threw more people in jail, they denied more people credit, and that was a key. Then they decided that they should teach my father a lesson. He was thrown in jail on a pretext of violating an ordinance about not disposing of trash at his business in the private.
She said some people lost their jobs, some people were thrown in jail. Can you name other things that may have happened to people during these times?
Way, and he was thrown in jail, and he was handcuffed and struck in the process with brass knuckles. And it was all contrived, but they felt that it was time to teach him a lesson, and that was one thing which was done. The other thing which was done was to start threatening the people who had relatives who died, that you should not send your body of your relative to Ollie Bond, because if you did, you would suffer the consequences. You would not get any more credit, and you'd lose your job, or this kind of thing. They decided to subject him to economic pressure, and maybe that would teach this uppity man a lesson. So this is the kind of thing which happened in individual cases. We
Okay, now then, but then it got worse.
We're going to have to reload.
Okay. Are we out now?
We're out now.
Okay. Escalate the violence and threaten how your father found out.
Scene 2, take 5, sound roll 3, camera roll 4.
So can you tell me what ultimately, as the violence increased against people and particularly your father, what ultimately happened? What led to his having to leave town?
Yes. What ultimately happened in the context of the branch's activity, for about 3 years, the activity of the branch escalated and broadened. And it was at the end of about 3 years that the whites realized that this wasn't just another Christian charitable group, that these people were troublemakers, to put it in the context of what they felt. And as a result, they felt that it was time to do something about it and teach people lessons. Therefore, they systematically attempted to cut off the income of those people who had jobs. And if they were self-employed, to reduce their ability to make money from the black community by threatening those who were their clients or patrons. And this is what began to happen in increasing numbers. As a result, people began to feel the pinch. And then there were arrests for various things, which most of the people, which they were not guilty, but you can always find a valid reason for an arrest. And they were thrown in jail. People who had never been near a jail in the past, who were people who were law-abiding citizens for one thing or another, and held overnight in a cell with people who had committed offenses as a means of teaching them a lesson. So these techniques increased. Then the matter of my father's patrons or clients, I should say, or those families who would have need for his services as an undertaker, being threatened, his business fell off.
In the last take, we talked about
all
that.
right.
Now I want to talk about how he came to be physically, his life came to be threatened.
Well, what happened, as this escalated, the people, the branch leaders, continued to be determined that they would not be intimidated, that they would continue their activities, despite the fact that some of them became frightened and naturally went undercover or decided that they would no longer actively participate, although they would provide some financial support. And my father said, we must go through, we must see if we cannot register, and we have the right to vote, and we have the right to be treated with dignity in this town. And he next went with a group to register to vote. And of course, they were denied this right, and they were also driven from the courthouse physically. Just the sheriff and some deputies or whatever came and literally drove them from the courthouse and refused to let them enter the room in the courthouse, which is where the registrar was. After that, he received threatening calls, phone calls, and notes saying that you will die if you do not stop this. They were anonymous, naturally. And a couple of the men who served on the informal committee were visited and at night at their homes. And they were threatened, and one was beaten, and one was arrested. And my father went to and posted bond to get him from jail. So this is the kind of atmosphere in which we were living at. This is the third year at the end of the third year of the branch. So he was, as I said, he was very concerned about this, but he was not intimidated, and he refused to stop. And finally, they arrested him once more for supposedly speeding. And of course, he was not speeding, but they said he had gone through a traffic light. And they kept him in jail without anyone's knowing where he was. And when they brought him home that time after when they released him from jail. They had beaten him rather badly. And they brought him home one in the evening after dark. I was home and in the living room. And I answered the door, and two men were there with my father between them. And they opened the door and says, "Here's your pa. You'd better take care of him because he's not feeling well." And they threw him on the couch, the living room couch. And of course he was bleeding where he had been hit with brass knuckles, and he was semi-conscious, really not conscious at that time. And I was home alone. Yes, my mother subsequently came home because she was, I don't know where she was, but she was not home with me. And she came home and called the one doctor that there was in the town, black doctor, to treat him. And of course they did. But he still felt that he had to do what he had to do, although his income had trickled to almost a non-existent level. He felt that he still had to continue to lead this. And there was a minister, a Reverend Buster Walker, who was one of the men who had been visited and threatened at night in his home, and told that if he didn't stop, he would pay a dear price for the results. And he did not either.
Now let's talk about the night of the burning of the house, and the warning, and tell me that story of basically your father's, what really is your father's last day or last
Yes.
night in town.
Well, after my father was beaten and his head was lacerated, my mother received a telegram that her brother had been seriously injured in an automobile accident in Kansas City, Kansas. So that she went to see her brother.
Tell me about a situation where you was in an accident or someone you know was in a car accident.
And to see how he was. I was left there in the house alone with my father, who then they had arranged for me to go and live with relatives up the street, a few blocks away, because my father did not want me there in the house. It was a large house, comparatively speaking, alone. And so I went to live with these relatives. I was in elementary school, of course, there in Brownsville. And he stayed in the house. And this was just before Christmas, a few days before Christmas, when she left. So my father had come by to see me on every day as he would come to town to close down his business. By that time, there was not anything for him to do for the business because he had no customers. He would take care of papers, insurance papers, and do a variety of things for people, and mostly without pay, just to help. So he told me that he would see me on Christmas Eve. And I said, fine, and we would have Christmas dinner together at these relatives' house. So he went on about his business. And in the process, I don't know what you want me to, I'm sorry.
Okay. Hang on a second.
Whether you want me to tell about my grandmother's,
Let's cut for a second.
I'm sorry, calling him, or whether you want me to tell how, sorry.
No, that's fine. I'm glad you asked, because now we know.
I'll stick it.
You take 6.
Sound roll 3, camera roll 4.
So why don't you begin to just tell me about that night? Was this Christmas Eve?
I had seen my father on the 23rd of December, who said he would be back on Christmas Eve, and he would see me, and then on Christmas Day he would come to dinner with the family, with the relatives with whom I was living. He did not come on Christmas Eve, but I did not think much about that because we knew that he had different things to do, and that sometimes he also wound up going out in the county to help somebody in the country. So I didn't think anything about that. Then early in the morning, on Christmas, early in the morning before sunrise, we heard the fire alarm in the small town. A central fire alarm rang, and you could hear it all over the town. And you knew that it was a fire. It was some type of a siren which rang from way up on top of something or other. So we wondered where the fire was because we heard it. But we did not know until later that morning, after the sun had risen, someone came by, and I don't remember who it was, to say, you know, the Bond house burned last night, telling my relatives. And that it's burned. The only thing left are 2 chimneys standing. And they don't know, but we understand that Ollie Bond was in the house. That is how I found out about the burning of the house. And we immediately went out there. They drove out there in a car, a family car, and I was in the car with them. And it was an antebellum house made of wood. So it burned literally to the ground, except for those huge chimneys. And we did not know that he was not in that house until, and someone said, we must go and tell Mother, meaning my grandmother, about this. And they drove to the country 6 miles away and told Grandmother about the house burning. And she said, well, we don't have to worry about Ollie because he left last night. He came to see me early in the day, and I told him he had to go. And she said Dr. Severe had come to warn me, and he had told me that if Ollie didn't leave, he couldn't do anything else for him. And I got Ollie to leave town. Reluctantly, she said he didn't want to go, but he went. So, they said, where? And she said he was going to join Mattie, my mother, in Kansas City.
Okay. Then what happened to the organization after your father left town?
The organization they met on a monthly basis. So they met for 2 or 3 times. Now, this is in December. And they met a few times after that, but the membership had dwindled. But the officers continued to see each other and to try to keep the branch together. And then next comes the...
This is part 2 interview with Mildred Roxborough. Please express your thoughts on the video in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe to the channel.